Good morning and welcome back. Let's start with a small recap. Software is unique. It's immaterial. Thus, we can easily reuse and automate simple tasks. As a consequence, most of the work on software project is an unpredictable task, a complex one. This makes planning software in advance a complex task in itself. And that is shown in the huge amount of overrun in the field. But why do we plan things? Well, we do so to avoid surprises. We want to make sure that things are doable and give it some constraints. Normally, we want something to be done by a certain date and with a certain amount of resources. And that is only possible if we define exactly what we need, what is our scope. And these constraints, they are not independent from each other, they are linked to each other. For instance, if I'm building a home and I choose to make a 3-story building with a garage, that is definitely going to take longer and more materials than building a shack. In most projects, one of the things that is defined is the scope, what we want. Normally we start from there. And then some negotiation starts to understand when it can be done and how. This negotiation takes sometimes the form of the Gantt chart we saw in the previous episode, where we link all the tasks we need and put them in a timetable. Then we use that information to understand the number of resources needed. Rinse and repeat a couple of times, and because most of the tasks are simple, we know how long and costly they are, and so we can be pretty accurate with our plan. Normally, we also are not strict about all these constraints. Impediments can still happen, unforeseen things can still happen, so normally we only are strict about 2 things of this trinity. For instance, if we see we cannot make a deadline, then maybe we add more people to it. You might have noticed that I use the words normally, often, and most when talking about projects. And the reason, of course, is because software projects are different. In our industry, we have a habit of budgeting software projects in the same way as we do in other sectors. We set a scope, we negotiate time and resources, but research shows it doesn't work, and I seem to see a vicious cycle that leads to that. First, let's remember, most tasks are complex ones. Thus, any estimate that we do has the same value of rolling a dice. We don't know how long they take. We just pull from our experience how long it might take. In fact, rolling a dice normally leads to more accurate estimates, as it tends to be less optimistic. This in turn means that most tasks are going to be late. We cannot estimate what we don't know, after all, and the project itself starts to be late pretty early. Common sense tells us that if it's late and we cannot miss the deadline, then we should add more resources. But because software is immaterial, the only resource we can add is people. Again, software doesn't have a cost, and I already have access to all the software I need, so I can only add more people to it in the hope of meeting the deadline. People are expensive, but missing the deadline usually costs more, so we just do it. But again, we are dealing with complex tasks here, so it means that the people that are currently working on them, they need to switch their focus in training the new people in order for them to be productive, which in turn reduces the time that they can dedicate in their own task, causing further delays, making us more likely to miss the deadline. At this point, what do? Do we add more people to try to meet the elusive goal, or do we accept that the deadline needs to be shifted? This happens a lot. I have personally seen this cycle repeated multiple times in a project until at some point the manager, whoever is responsible for it, decides to cut the losses and deliver whatever is ready, or not deliver at all. Software projects, counterintuitively, are often delayed by adding more people, especially if close to the deadline. This is also known as the Brooks Law, as it was coined by Fred Brooks in his 1975 book, The Mythical Man-Month. At this point, I dare ask, what is the point of planning? If the goal is to control costs, whether human or capital, then we are failing. Maybe a better way could be in accepting the intrinsic properties of software projects and stop planning. A more effective way to control cost could be to build a small team with a strong vision and see what they can deliver in a given amount of time, accepting that the scope will not be exactly what we want. Only if satisfied with the result, then it's worth to continue and put more stuff into the scope until the project hits a satisfying completeness. It's kind of the other way around when you think about it. Instead of first deciding the scope, we first decide resources and we give them a deadline. And then we see how much can be effectively delivered in that time. After all, software is immaterial. We can change things however we like without having to wait for a demolition squad. And thus, even trying for a scope that is smaller than what we need or that is not exactly what we want might be worth the effort, even only to gain knowledge. Again, this is not new, what I am saying. This is something that already happens in reality. This is what happens in most projects while they are running. But maybe we should stop treating this phenomenon as something that is unforeseen and label it as bad management, and just accept that that's the way it goes and that's how we should treat software projects. Personally, I do often feel that we don't really learn in our industry. Yes, we learn technology, we spew new technologies every other year or so, but management practices, they pretty much stay. Brooks made his observation in 1975. That's 50 years ago, half a century, almost. And yet, projects are still budgeted in the same way. Managers still do huge Gantt charts, sometimes in Excel, and add people when the deadline cannot be met. This is unsettling, maybe, but it's food for thought. Maybe next time we talk a bit more about team dynamics and how they affect deadlines. In the meantime, I wish you a very nice week.